Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, where we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey, and there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 384. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another super exciting guest, Halona Black. She was originally a guest on the show back in April of 2016, when we talked about how to create a signature book for your business. Her life has totally changed since then. Still a writer, still making a living from her writing, but she's now living in other countries. And I've been following her on Facebook ever since we did the podcast episode, and I've been just really enjoying her posts about life in Southeast Asia and now Africa. And I really wanted to get her back on the show because I've been wanting to have this conversation about being an expat for a long time. I think it's an option that a lot of people don't consider for whatever reason, or they consider it, but they're afraid because it's a big leap to live in another country. So I brought Halona on to talk about how being an expat has changed her life and what it's given her. So Halona Black is a freelance writer for the tech industry, self-help book ghostwriter, and thought leadership consultant who's currently living in Kigali, Rwanda. She made her exit from the United States in June of 2018 to seek healing from fibroids, severe adrenal fatigue, depression, and a host of other health problems. Her health was forever changed when she connected with local healers who taught her that true healing comes from self-love and expressing your soul's desires. Halona continues her healing journey while growing her remote business from beautiful locations like Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. So in this episode, we talk about how Halona made the leap to being an expat and how it changed her life, how she decides which countries to move to because she's lived in a few in the last couple of years, what she's learned from expat life, how to prepare for solo female travel so that it feels safe because she's traveled obviously within the countries that she's lived in and she usually travels alone. So how does she prepare in advance to make those trips safe? Finally, her top tips for someone who might want to move abroad. Now, even if this is something that you've never considered, I would love for you to continue to listen to this episode because I think this is one of those things that is life-changing. And moving abroad does not have to be like forever. You can start out with something short. You can start out with doing like a month-long study abroad or 2 weeks or something like that. But there's something about kind of living in a place rather than just traveling there that makes a huge shift. You kind of become a local for that amount of time. And I think the lessons that you can learn about life and about yourself are just so much deeper than you can get from just travel. However, I'm also a big fan of travel. So let's move straight into the interview because Halona has such great tips about expat life and how to make that move and how it's changed her life. It's so exciting. I could have talked to her for days. So here we go. Hello, Halona. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Good. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So I've been following you. You were first on the show back in 2016, April, where we were talking about how to create your signature book for your business. And since then, I've been following you on Facebook and looking at all of your travels and your expat life. And I've been wanting to have you back on the show now that my show has shifted to non-business things to talk about moving abroad and living abroad and what that is like. So what made you first start thinking about moving to another country? How did that come about?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in everything international and, learning about other cultures. When I was in high school, I took 4 years of French. Not that I didn't learn to speak fluently in French in high school, but I did. I took 4 years of French. And one of the reasons that I took the 4 years of French was because my French teacher I thought was so fascinating. She would teach regular high school French during the school year, and then during the summers, she would travel to other countries. And so she would come back with these really cool stories about working on fishing boats in Alaska or, her summer in France or, whatever other cross-cultural experiences she would have. It was really important to her to sort of pass on to her students what it means to be able to communicate with people in other cultures. And I just sort of I was just always just really curious about living in other countries. And so I went to college, graduated, and then I wound up joining the Peace Corps.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I was in the Peace Corps about a year after I graduated from college. And I wound up going to Togo in this tiny country in West Africa. And then I wound up, after Peace Corps, I worked and traveled around West Africa for several years. And then, of course, I came back to the United States to work and go to grad school and do all those things that I felt like I needed to do in order to have a career.
Yeah.
And I'm
all
glad
the practical things.
Yeah, those things that I felt like I needed in order, to be able to make money, the money that I wanted and all that other stuff. And I learned a lot. I went to grad school. I, studied international education, and I worked in education both in the United States and working in projects in other countries as well, working with adult learners. But my goal, what I always really wanted, was to be able to sort of live overseas permanently. And not so much as an international development worker, which is part of what I had done in part of my career as well. To go to overseas to other countries to sort of participate in nonprofit organizations or non-governmental organizations to be able to improve local communities. I sort of fell out of love with that. And I just really just wanted to travel and it's just sort of do my own thing. And so now what I do is I started my own business as a freelance writer. And that sort of gave me the freedom to be able to create my own schedule, to be able to live basically wherever I choose to live, as long as I have access to pretty decent internet.
Yeah.
And so that's what I do now.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. So can we go back to Peace Corps? What was that experience like? Because that was my dream for so many years, and then I didn't do it, and then I got too old, and now it's like the thing I never did.
You're not too old. You're not too old. You're not too old.
But it was my dream, and so many of my friends did it, and I was just really, really excited about it. And I remember going to the Peace Corps office at my university. Actually, when I was in grad school, I remember speaking to the Peace Corps office, and we were talking about where I could go with my languages, the very few languages that I had. So what was it like? What was the experience like? Did it live up to your expectations? What did you learn?
Yeah, when I joined, I don't know. I don't think I really knew what to expect. Honestly, I just wanted to be able to go someplace that was longer than the usual 2 weeks of vacation that, you get told when you get a regular job. People are like, oh, you get a whole 2 weeks of vacation when you take a job, and that should be plenty. And I really just wanted to be able to go someplace and be able to say, I really learned something about the culture in this place. But, of course, I was always concerned about being able to afford being gone for 2 years. And so the Peace Corps paid for everything. I literally just had to get a passport and show up. They took care of the rest.
And what kind of work were you doing in Togo?
I was working with women's groups in agriculture and health.
Oh.
And so I worked on literacy projects with women. We worked on shea butter cooperatives to help them to package and sell their shea butter to local communities. We did health education projects together on teaching communities about female genital mutilation and things like that. Yeah, I did a variety of projects. My original project was supposed to solely be an agricultural volunteer.
Oh.
What I learned, and not even that I was I didn't know a lot about agriculture. I got assigned to being an agriculture volunteer because I had taken a few horticulture classes when I was in college. And they said, oh, agriculture, that's perfect. But you'll learn that a lot of whether you're an agriculture volunteer, a business volunteer, or something else, a lot of those topics sort of intersect in different ways. And so you wind up, whatever the community needs is where you wind up moving into.
And so what was Togo like?
Togo was very interesting because even today, Togo is a very politically interesting place. Because when I was there, the president that was there, he had been in power at least I want to say almost 40, maybe 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Died in office, and then they put this son in power. And so it was my first time living in an environment where it was clear that the people were not interested in having the president, that particular president there, but there really wasn't much that they could do about it. And so it was sort of difficult for me to be able to grasp how much of an effect that actually has on people and their ability to be able to, I guess, move forward with their lives, to be able to build their lives in the way that they want to. And so as an American, that was difficult to learn about, to understand, even though we have poverty in the United States, there's levels to poverty.
Yeah.
I've learned that poverty can be absolutely devastating. Absolutely devastating. Like there were days when I would just go home and cry because it just felt like the poverty was just so impossible. But at that same time, people are also hopeful. There's a hopefulness about, even though that they know that things are not as good as they would like it to be, they still get up every day. They go on about whatever it is they need to do to be able to handle their lives. They still have hope that their children will grow up and be able to be certain things in life so that they can help the family. I learned a lot about the power of how the mind works and how it could actually help to keep people in a positive mode to keep them going. Like you have to have hope. If you don't have hope, there's nothing left. So even in circumstances where you're living in places where it seems like there's nothing to hope for, people still manage to have hope. And I just thought that was just a really beautiful lesson for me to learn.
And what was it like going back to the States after spending so much time in Africa?
It was the most depressing.
Yeah. Not surprised.
Yeah. So this was over 20 years ago. I'm 43 now. So I was in my early 20s when I left. I came back home it was right after 9/11. So it was, for Americans, it was a difficult time just because there was no job. You come out of Peace Corps and you expect to be able to get a job and just to be able to get back into life. But it was just very difficult. And even when I did, it took me almost a good year to be able to find a job. And I found it difficult to be able to just get used to the weather in the United States. I had moved to Washington, D.C. And I remember around October-ish and just coming outside of work at 5:00 and it was already dark and cold. You just came out of living in a place for 2 years where it was very, tropical and sunny most of the time. And so that in itself is very depressing. Sitting in a cubicle with no windows and, in just a very closed off space. It was just difficult. I just couldn't understand why people would do this to themselves on purpose.
And yet there you were doing that to yourself on purpose.
Yeah. And because, what else are you going to do? You got to go to work. And then even during lunch breaks, lunch break just wasn't enough. And I would I didn't care how cold it was. I just needed to go outside and to be able to get air. I would just sit outside in the park in the dead of winter just so I can get some sunshine and fresh air for a few minutes. And it was very difficult to explain to people why I needed that time in that space. And I don't really think I even knew at the time. I've grown a lot, of course, over 20 years, as most people do. And so I understand why I do it now. But back then, it was just I just needed to breathe. I just always felt confined.
Yeah, it's like you're craving the air and the space to yourself.
Yeah.
So how did you eventually make the leap to moving abroad and being an expat? What was going on in your mind? What was going on in your life? What were the decisions that led you to make that shift?
Well, when I came home from the Peace Corps, I had gotten married while I was overseas. So I was married to a Togolese gentleman, and we moved back to the States. I moved back to the States first, and then 6 months later, he joined me. And we were married for 8 years, and it didn't work. But one of the things that we wanted to do was to be able to travel while we were married. And for various reasons, that just never worked out. Then I was single for a while, and then I got involved in another longer-term relationship for about 5 or 6 years. And, we said that we wanted to travel. That didn't work out. And so by the time I got to about 40 years old, I had just felt like I had just kept putting off this dream to be able to live overseas for way too long.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had gotten very, very sick I figured out over time, over the last couple of years, that there was all sorts of things that felt like was imbalanced in my body. So I had things like uterine fibroids, my thyroid wasn't working properly, my hormones were imbalanced, my adrenal glands weren't working properly. Like it was just a bunch of stuff that just made me feel absolutely fatigued all the time. Now I understand it to be that all of these things were out of balance because I wasn't living the life that I wanted to live. I was trying to force a life that wasn't fitting for me and sort of wondering why it wasn't working out. And so I don't know, maybe there's something about the age of 40 where people are just like, you know what, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to be able to do it. So I wound up, I had already had my business as a freelance writer for maybe 3 years by then, 2.5 years. And so I decided I knew how to be able to keep a client. And I felt comfortable enough with saying, okay, well, if I leave the States, I know how to be able to go and find clients should I need more to be able to make money while I'm overseas. So I was living in Florida at the time. I needed to pay off a few things, as well as save a few dollars. And so my dad and my stepmother allowed me to move in with them for 7 months in Delaware. Yeah, which was really, really nice of them.
Back to the cold from Florida.
Yeah, it was cold.
Yeah, but that's lovely.
I'm glad that they allowed me to be able to do that and to offer me the support that I needed to be able to do that. And after 7 months, I moved to Thailand. My body was sick and horribly exhausted, but I said that I would go to Thailand for 3 months. And of course, I said if I didn't like it, I could always go home or, make other plans or whatever. But I went to Thailand and I absolutely loved it. And I've been abroad for the last 2.5 years and haven't been back to the States since.
Oh, wow. You haven't even gone back to visit.
No.
Oh.
I see everyone through Skype.
Okay, how interesting. Okay, so Thailand, what did you love about it? How had you been to Asia before, or was it just, here's where I'm going to start and see what happens?
Yeah, I'd never been to Asia before. I chose Asia because it just felt like a faraway place. I felt like, okay, well, I had already been to West Africa, which was great. And I figured I would wind up going back to Africa at some point, which is where I am now. But Asia just felt like a really faraway place. And I felt like, if I was ever going to do something that was just totally out of my element, then Asia would be a great place. And Thailand in particular, from all the research that I had done through watching videos of other people who go to Thailand, it was safe and it was cheap, to be honest. You can spend $100 to $300 a month on your rent. I just felt like I could sustain myself on the money that I was making from my business without feeling a strain.
Right. And give you a good standard of living and a lifestyle that made you happy. So how long were you in Thailand?
I was in Thailand for 9 months. And while I was in Thailand, I worked on all of my health issues. I kind of stumbled upon working with 2 different shamans, which was totally unexpected. And I was looking for something that would help me, but I said, well, maybe I can find like acupuncture or something to be able to help me. I went down this whole rabbit hole of working with shamans and then herbalists to be able to help me to detox my body, but also to be able to work on a lot of mind shifts that I needed to make to be able to prioritize my own wellness and to be able to stand independently in, what it is that I wanted for my life and to be able to move from there instead of trying to shift and mold myself into what I thought other people wanted for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where did you go after Thailand?
Well, even while I was in Thailand, I was still traveling.
Okay.
Because when you go to Thailand, you go on a tourist visa. Generally, every 2 to 3 months, you have to leave the country and come back in order to continue to stay in the country on a tourist visa. So I was been able to travel to the country of Laos, Myanmar. I was in Cambodia for 3 months.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then when I did a first stint in Vietnam for 3 months, and then I went to Cambodia, and then I came back to Vietnam, and I did about 9 months in Vietnam as well.
Okay. So how did those countries compare? What was your favorite out of all the countries that you were in Asia?
My favorite, I would probably say, my favorite place to visit is probably Cambodia, hands down. Just because I went to Angkor Wat to visit all the ancient temples there, and it just felt like the most foreign thing that I could ever do. in like in my life. While I was in Thailand, of course, being around Buddhists and things like that, this was like the first time I had ever really been exposed to Buddhism and going to Buddhist temples and things like that. And I actually got a lot into meditation because of it. But when you go to Cambodia and you get to visit these temples that, were once Hindu and then eventually it became Buddhist temples over the course of history, it just feels ancient. Like being an American, the United States is just such a new place that we don't really have a sense of the ancient in American culture. So it was beautiful for me to be able to connect with cultures that were this ancient and to be able to experience it. So I appreciated that. It's a great place to visit, but not necessarily to stay as a business person because, the internet in Cambodia isn't the greatest.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. So Thailand and Vietnam were my two favorite places to live as like a home base. Just because you can still get, all the Buddhist temples and things like that, but the infrastructure of the countries are also quite good. So you'll get good internet in most places that you go around in those countries. And, you can stay in an apartment, that's probably better than most other Southeast Asian countries, and still be able to do so for very cheap. You can very healthfully, very cheap to be able to get good organic food that you can buy on the street or you can make it yourself. So it was a lot more convenient to be able to live in at least the life that I was looking to live.
And what would you say are the biggest ways that your lifestyle changed moving from the United States to Southeast Asia? Like, how did your lifestyle improve?
I'm a lot more slow and I don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
I've always wanted more slowly in the States, but of course people make you feel guilty for it.
Yeah.
Like if I wanted to spend the entire 60 minutes enjoying my lunch, at work, but your boss would call you back at minute 55.
Yeah.
Asking you where you are and saying that you're late. And there's just a whole work culture that I don't even appreciate about being in the United States. And so I don't feel guilty about taking time for myself and being able to rest. And the fact that I have my own business makes it very easy for me to be able to organize my work schedule around how I feel. So if I wake up very early in the morning and I, do some things for myself, like my meditation or exercising or just walking outside, and then I'll work for a few hours. And, if by noon I feel like I need to take a nap, that's what I do. I don't, and as beforehand in the United States, I always felt like, if I must be lazy, something is wrong with me if I can't push through the entire day without needing to rest. And I need to have coffee in order to stay up. All these things that we do to ourselves to sort of pull ourselves in a direction that is not natural for us.
Yeah, drug ourselves to be more productive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're not doing it. The systems that we're doing it for don't really care about our own personal welfare. We have to really take the initiative to really care about that for ourselves. And I've learned to really organize a life that works for me instead of making it work so that, someone else can make money off of my sickness.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. So this year, in the middle of a coronavirus epidemic, you changed countries and continents.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. So living in Vietnam when the pandemic hit, and we were hit quite early. So like December of last year was pretty much when we started to feel the effects of the coronavirus. Because we're so close to China. So things started to lock down, slowly but surely, a lot earlier than probably a lot of the rest of the world, and certainly, the United States. And so I started to see a lot of things change as far as like how, visa visa arrangements for tourists was starting to work, and how, other countries around me were starting to close their borders. And so I actually wanted to stay in Asia for at least another year, because there were several countries that I haven't been to, like Bali or Indonesia and Malaysia, the Philippines. There were just a few other countries that I wanted to be able to visit, but didn't get to, because I felt like, the countries were just making it difficult for me to be able to do that on a tourist visa. And trying to get a different type of visa to be able to stay longer in the country was just, it was very expensive and just complicated to be able to apply for. So I figured maybe it's time for me to be able to create some sort of a home base for myself. And for the last few years of my life, I just sort of, very quietly been looking at the country of Rwanda in East Africa. And I've, kind of quietly been impressed by the way that this country has moved past the genocide from, I believe it's 1994. And how much development they've experienced since then. Like I'm here now, and just to be able to see just how clean the country is. They take a lot of pride in keeping the streets clean, and people are just so wonderful here. And they have a very big emphasis on creating business, so that it'll be a welcoming place for the world to be able to come to, and to be able to create income, for people who live here. There's a strong sense of the government wanting to be able to take care of Rwandese and other people who come to the country, to be able to participate in its development. Yeah.
And so what was it like?
Felt like a really great place.
So what was it like moving there? Are you on a tourist visa? Did you have to get some other kind of visa?
Yeah, so I'm here on a tourist visa. I literally just got here. This is like my second week.
Oh my God, I thought you were here there for longer. I thought it had been more like a month.
No.
Oh, wow.
No, I've only been here for 2 weeks. So when you get a visa on arrival, a tourist visa for 30 days. And what I'm doing is, in the next 10 days or so, you got to go to an office, and I'm going to apply for what's called a business survey visa. And so it gives you 3 months to be able to just sort of give you some time to think about what sort of business you want to be able to create while you're here in the country. Which is really nice. I don't think I've ever really heard of that in probably any other country that I've looked at all. It sort of shows the level of seriousness in which, they really want people to be able to come here and start businesses and really invest in the development of the country. So if I can have a whole 3 months to be able to just sort of start that process and figure out, what sorts of opportunities are here and what makes sense for me to be able to create in this country, so that's basically where I am at the moment.
And so what are you loving about Rwanda so far? Is it what you expected? Is it different?
It's what I expected, but even a lot more. Like I've watched videos of Rwanda, and it looks beautiful. Rwanda is called the land of 1,000 hills. And it actually like everything is a hill. Like you're walking uphill or downhill.
Good for exercise.
It's like being on a Stairmaster all day. And it's absolutely beautiful, just an absolutely beautiful country. And there is no bad view anywhere that you can go, at least in the city of Kigali, where I am, in the capital city. Like there's no bad views anywhere. You're always either looking up or down, just to be able to see all types of rolling hills and, green trees and mountains. And at night, everything is lit up. It looks like you're living in the Hollywood Hills, but you're in East Africa. It's such an amazingly beautiful country, and I can't wait to explore, like the northern parts where I had recently found out that there was like a whole national park with five volcanoes in it,
Ooh.
which is just crazy to like, how is there five volcanoes in one place? That's just a miracle.
That sounds exciting. You've got a whole new country to explore.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm like life is just so exciting. Like I'm just so excited.
I love it. I love it. So do you get much opportunity to travel in all the countries that you've lived? I know you've mentioned some travel, but obviously you're working and running your business. So how do you balance that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it depends on what it is that I'm doing. So, of course, in the city that I'm in, wherever I'm living, there's always, there's plenty to explore in the city that I'm living in. But I do also take time to be able to pack up and travel for a week or two to other parts of the country that I'm living in. When I get, tired of staying in the place that I'm staying in. And so, at least in Asia, it was always really easy to just be able to pack up and find another Airbnb, take a flight for $20 to Hanoi or to Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And, to be able to stay, spend maybe an extra $100 for a week someplace.
Oh, wow.
And still be able to work and explore, the cities or the countryside of someplace else. While I'm still working a few hours a day on my business.
So do you ever worry about safety? Because I know a lot of women are so afraid to travel alone because they think, oh, it's not safe. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I'll say that I never go someplace that I don't feel safe going to. What I will usually do, I'm a solo traveler.
Yeah.
And so before I go to someplace new, I will try to find connections with people that are already there on the ground, or talk to people who have already been there and have passed through and love the place. And, maybe they have some sort of a connection that they want to share with me. So I feel like if the place wasn't safe, or if there were certain spaces that were not safe within the country, they would tell me, maybe you should avoid this space, but, over in this other area over here, it's totally fine. You'll be fine. So, if I don't feel like it's a safe space, I won't go. But always connecting with people is really important. And Facebook makes it really easy to be able to do that nowadays. There's a group for everybody doing everything.
Yeah.
So that is a good way for me to be able to feel more safe about the place, that I'm going to. I don't like to do a whole lot of research. I'm not one of those big planners where I have to plan out every step of my trip. I kind of like to show up and sort of, figure out whatever shows up is what I'm meant to explore.
Yeah.
But just to have a general idea of where I'm going is good enough for me.
Yeah.
I've learned to sort of go by feeling. If there's nothing about the place that's really interesting or exciting, if I'm not excited about it, then it's probably a place that I'm not supposed to be in.
Yeah, that makes sense. So out of all the places that you've traveled and in the places you've lived, what are some of your favorite places? It could be countries or cities.
I love living in Da Nang in Vietnam, which was a real surprise. When I first left Thailand and I went to Da Nang in Vietnam, I was a little bit disappointed in being there because it felt really different from Thailand. I felt like maybe the people were a little bit more closed off than the people in Thailand, which I actually found the opposite to be true. Vietnamese people are like some of the funniest, most open people that I've ever met, whether they speak English or not. But it was nice to be able to live in a beach town. And Da Nang is it's a small beach town. And it was just nice to be able to be in a beach every day where I could literally just sort of walk. I lived on the riverside of the city, but it was very easy to take a motorbike, which is like 5 to 10 minutes to the other side of town, and to be on the beach and still be able to see beautiful green mountains. And that was really nice, particularly after I had gone through working with my herbalists and the shamans that I was working with in Thailand on my healing process. Like being in the ocean is such a healing experience.
Yeah.
Just to be able to, like when I first got there for the first 3 months that I was in Vietnam, the first go around, like every morning I would get up and make sure that I was literally in the water, for the first 20 minutes. And then, just hang around and just get some sun for maybe the remainder of the hour. And then it just got so hot that I just needed to leave.
Yeah.
But yeah, Vietnam, I think just living on a beach has always been one of my dreams. And so living in Da Nang has just really been one of my favorite places, at least to live long term.
So what about language? So I know obviously you had your high school French, but how do you navigate these countries where English is not the native language?
Well, I go to places where the English is not the native language, but there's always there's always somebody that does. And just sort of learning a few basic phrases, like hello or goodbye or thank you, is often enough for you to be able to get by. I'm a proponent of learning the language if you can.
Yeah.
I don't want to make it seem like, it's totally okay to just disregard people's language and culture everywhere you go. But, at the same time, you have to choose how it is that you spend your time, especially if you're running a business.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, I didn't prioritize taking as much Vietnamese language as I would have liked. However, now that I'm in Rwanda, you can find people who speak English. The place that I'm living at for the month of November, it's sort of like it's in a more of a village-like area, and so there's really nobody there that speaks any English. And since I'm looking at Rwanda as more of a long-term home base, and then I can certainly travel from here, to other countries, but the local language is called Kinyarwanda. And so I'm looking for people who can at least help me with, just some basic conversational Kinyarwanda, to be able to speak to local people and to be able to go into markets and, just understand cultural cues that I would not be able to pick up on my own.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what would be your top tips for someone who might be thinking about moving abroad? Because I think a lot of people fantasize about the expat life, but they don't know how to start. They're afraid. It's a huge life change. So what would be your top tips?
My top tips is to just sort of get excited about the place that you're most excited about going to. Really immerse yourself into the country or at least the region of the world that you're most interested in. So before I went to Thailand, I watched a lot of YouTube videos where, you get to see, you get to see the place. Video is really powerful. Yeah. Read other people's blog posts about their experiences in that particular country. Just to really immerse yourself. If you can find like travel magazines that talk about, sort of off the beaten path, things that you can do to just to immerse yourself into the country before you get there, and really sort of like envision yourself in the place. See yourself in your mind, being able to make friends with people. Have a positive outlook on all the great things that could happen for you, as opposed to thinking about, if you watch the news, there's, a million other things that can go wrong when you leave the comfort of home.
Yeah.
Um, but allow yourself to get lost in the possibility of all the great things that can happen for you, much your life will open up as a result of doing this experience. Whether you choose to do it for, a couple weeks, or you choose to make this a lifetime change. I get questions from people who ask me a lot, what do you regret about leaving the United States? And I'm like, absolutely nothing. I don't even understand like the basis of that question. I'm always confused. Like what sort of fears are like, where does that come from? Like, what sort of fears are you harboring about leaving the United States to ask someone, what do they regret about leaving? Like, I could go back if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I have choices. You have choices in life. And I don't know. I just get the feeling that some people feel like if they make a choice to go someplace that they'll never be able to return back.
Yeah.
Life is just so open and full of possibilities.
Yeah.
And I just wish that more women understood that they have choices. You don't have to only deal with whatever it is that was handed to you. You can quite literally make your life whatever it is that you want to make it.
Absolutely. And if you're not happy with what you've got, think about what you want instead, rather than focusing on how much you hate what you've got.
Yeah. I mean, and it's such a much more enjoyable process. We focus on the negative so much. Life doesn't have to be so hard. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. You can, even if you're going through a difficult time, you can choose to switch your mindset, to sort of make it, more of a more pleasant learning experience for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So do you have any kind of final words for someone who is thinking about making the leap, or anything that you'd like to say that we haven't covered so far?
I would simply say to just do whatever it is that you need to do to be able to get clear on what it is that you want in your life. I remember I used to listen to so many podcasts and other things, your podcast included, where I would always listen to people who really just sounded like they were, living great lives. And at the time, I felt so stuck in what it is that I was doing. And so, people, they're doing the right things by wanting to, I guess, surround themselves with other resources that people create, like your podcast and anything else that they could find, to be able to be that sort of, that sense of positive reinforcement about, the thing that they want to create is actually possible. You may not know how to be able to get there, but, just listening, to things like this is actually a step in the right direction. So, to be able to feel good about doing those things and to be able to move forward towards the thing that you want to be able to create. And no matter what other people say about your interest in traveling abroad or moving abroad permanently, or, just wanting to be able to expand your horizons, if that's how you feel about what it is that you want to be able to do, then you should certainly go for it. And you should find people who support you in making those decisions, as opposed to holding back your own development, by listening to people who don't support you.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think also we need to kind of learn to keep our plans to ourselves if we know we're surrounded by people who won't be supportive, because those people can just kind of like drum up more fears and make it even more difficult.
Yeah. And I mean, and I'll even tell you something personal. When I was a kid, I used to call my mom. My mom absolutely loved me. So let me say that first of all. She's passed on now.
Oh,
but when I was a kid, I used to sort of lovingly call her the dream pisser on her. Because I would say things about my life. And she would find a reason as to why I couldn't do it, or why I shouldn't do that, or or anything else. But that was really a reflection of how she felt about her life.
Yeah.
The limitations that she felt in her life. And I totally understand that at 43 now, where she was in her life. And I understand where that thinking came from. And so that's why I work so hard to be able to get out of that sort of thinking and even share with anyone who's interested in listening things that they can do to be able to get out of that thinking, other people can do to be able to get out of that thinking for themselves.
And do you have any plans to write a book about your expat life?
Yes, I do.
Yay!
Particularly about my healing process in Thailand.
Oh,
I've been working on it, on a memoir for the last couple of months. Just because I feel like I just have to.
Yeah, you do. It's a great...
I've learned so many lessons, and just trying to be able to create a language around what it is, the things that I've experienced.
Yeah.
And just how, for a lot of people, this information is really earth-shattering.
Yeah.
They don't know that they can change their life, and there's steps they can do to be able to break out of the molds that they're not happy in. And so, I am writing a book at the moment.
Oh, good. I look forward to reading it. Well, I could talk to you all day long, but I'm mindful of time. So thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot wait to put this on the podcast and have people listen to it and think about new possibilities for themselves and for their lives. This is such a huge life change to move countries, but I think it definitely is the right decision for a lot of people. And I think for more people than might be considering it now.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. I had a great time talking to you.
Me too. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Thank you so much for listening, and remember to visit hollywharton.com/384 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.